My name is John Brink, and today we are podcasting from Prince George and with On the Brink. And our guest today is a special guest. Her name is Dr. Kathy Lewis, and she is a very interesting person, especially she is a registered professional forester and much more. And so I really look forward to this discussion. Kathy, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Now, first I should ask you, do I call you doctor, professor, or Kathy?
Kathy is perfectly fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
So, are you from BC or?
Yeah, I grew up in Vancouver and Surrey, and then I left a couple times BC to go to school in the States, and then came back, and I've been here ever since.
So you've been in Prince George for about 30 years?
Well, since 1983, off and on. And then I did leave twice.
Oh, longer than 83?
Yeah, left twice, once to go do my master's and then once to go do my PhD.
Yeah.
But each time I kept finding my way back here.
Yeah, interesting. And I believe in 1983 you went to UBC.
That's right, yeah.
And to get your Bachelor's of Science. And then now, your dad was a professor at UBC as well?
That's correct, yeah. He was in oceanography.
And so what, oceanography?
Yeah.
Interesting. What brought you to forestry?
Well, when I was going through high school, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, like most high school students.
Yeah.
And I was planning on going into UBC just in general sciences.
Right.
But my dad kind of insisted that I pick something and go in some direction. So I actually started in physical education and did a year at UBC in that, but found it just wasn't exciting to me. It wasn't of interest. And both my parents made the observation that I really enjoyed doing stuff in the outdoors, hiking and skiing and working outside. And
so is that a question of, as many young people have these days, you have to find your passion.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then focus on your career path going forward, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
So they suggested that maybe a different area would be good, and my dad happened to notice a poster at UBC that was advertising a co-op education program in forestry and in engineering that was targeted at women, trying to get more women into those two professions.
UBC?
At UBC.
Okay.
This was a long time ago.
Yeah.
And I took advantage of that and changed my major from physical education into forestry. Yeah. And had an opportunity to work in the summer in the field in forestry and just loved it.
And then working in the field, where did you go and do that?
I was in Barrier. No, up in Barrier in the interior, just north of Kamloops.
In the Kootenay region, right?
Well, it's more in the Kamloops area.
Oh yeah, Kamloops area. Yeah. So okay.
Yeah, so that was my first experience working in forestry, and it was great. I just loved being outside and doing the work, and so when I came back after that summer, I switched my majors and went into forestry.
Yeah, and then as you went into forestry at UNBC, the first thing that you do, go into your bachelor's. At what point do you become a registered professional forester, an RPF?
So normally if you attend a university that has an accredited degree like UBC does and like UNBC does, right after graduation you're eligible to register, and then you have to do essentially an articling period under a registered professional forester, do some exams, and then you can become registered after the bachelor's.
Yeah, after the bachelor's. Mm-hmm. And the bachelor's you did also at UBC.
At UBC, yeah.
And then for a period of time, you have such an extensive background, it would take me a week to kind of give it justice, but I'll do the best I can. But at one point, you ended up in Virginia.
Yeah.
Why?
So that was to do my master's degree. And while I was at UBC, I took a course in forest pathology, which is the study of tree disease.
Okay, so pathology is in particular as it deals with disease,
That's
right?
correct, yeah.
Okay, and that's a specialty in the field, right?
That's right, yeah.
Okay.
And so I really enjoyed that, and while I was, my first job after UBC, my bachelor's, was in Prince George. I was working with the Department of Northern and Indian Affairs as an assistant to their forester. And a number of people knew that I was quite interested in pathology because I'd really become quite excited about it at UBC. And I had an opportunity to do a master's kind of fall into my lap. And so I took it. And
At where?
At Virginia Tech. So
In Virginia.
In Virginia, yeah.
Virginia.
So I was, I think, 3 weeks away from running out of a summer job and not sure what I was going to do. And this opportunity became available, and I jumped on a plane and away I went and did a 2-year
Quite an undertaking,
master's.
right?
Well, it was a little scary, but a fantastic experience. Again, it was almost like moving. I mean, it was a different country, but Virginia is quite different than anything I was used to. Not only the forest, but the culture and
quite an experience.
Yeah. So that was a really good experience for me. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, and then so then you continued at UBC, and then maybe I'm skipping something here, but now we are in the late 80s. So
I finished my testing my memory here. I think I finished my master's at Virginia Polytech in 1985.
Yeah.
And then I had an opportunity to come back to Prince George to do some work here.
Yeah, and at one point you worked for Industrial Forest Services as well, which is a consulting firm to the industry, IFS.
Yeah.
And when did you do that? In the late 80s as well?
That was after I came back after working to do my master's. I came and worked with the Ministry of Forests. I was a regional pathologist here.
Locally?
In Prince George. And then again, it was a great experience, but I kind of wanted to do a little bit more. And so I went off to Oregon State University to get my PhD. And it was after that I came and worked with IFS.
Now, to get your PhD, that means that involves a lot of studying and doing briefs and articles or extensive writing and research, right?
Yeah, a lot of research. So I didn't take very many classes at that point. It was just doing independent research, of course, under the supervision of my mentor. But and ironically, my research was back up in Prince George, so I was studying some forest diseases here.
Amazing.
Yeah.
You know So you then got your PhD from Oregon Tech,
Oregon State,
Oregon State, and so now we are in late 80s.
1990 is when I graduated from
1990,
there.
And then then for a period of time, so I came here in 1965 to Prince George, and worked in the industry, as a cleanup man, lumber pilot, and all the other kind of things that that people do when they start off, and with the idea, with the dream of building a lumber mill, and and when I first came here, I didn't speak the language, didn't have a job, and didn't know anybody. I had $25.47, so I had to kind of start from that angle. But what was interesting then to me was that it was a boom town, and a lot of things were happening, and the industry started to evolve into close utilization, pulp mills and sawmills, and it became a real industry. But one of the things that, after I was here for a number of years and then was established and started my company, I was quite involved politically, and and we started working in the early to mid 80s on a major project, and the project was to build a freestanding university in northern British Columbia, and I was in particular involved in that, and working on the political side as a writing president here, and then a number of other people, and then obviously 16,000 people signed their $5, and we were able to achieve that, the commitment in 1999, the commitment by government to build a freestanding, which was critical to us, university in northern British Columbia. It wasn't much longer after that you came on board.
I was one of the first 40 faculty members hired, so I actually started in 1993. Yeah, and before the official opening, and we were teaching downtown here, and the university was just being constructed.
Correct.
Yeah.
So you go back a long, long way, and with the, so do I, and so it's kind of interesting to sit here because we have not really spoken before, and then to, see the university evolve, and so did the college alongside with it as well, and see the whole city of Prince George and the region mature into, where at one time it was a boom town. When I first came here in 1965, and the normal dialect would be how long have you been here, and when are you leaving? Where now it has become a city, and I call it the capital of northern British Columbia.
Absolutely.
And and is evolving still as we speak. And we're sitting in a location that even behind us, we can see a new swimming pool going up, and Prince George is changing, and the region is changing, and so is the university.
Yeah, I think there's been a couple major paradigm shifts in Prince George. One of them was in the 60s with the pulp mills that brought in a whole new level of resource utilization and workers and those kinds of things.
And forest policy was that.
Exactly, there was a big shift then.
Close
as well.
utilization, which meant that if you had the privilege, because timber is owned by you and me, the people here in British Columbia, at least 95% of it. And so therefore there is always a social obligation attached to timber, and the privilege of having tenure, has certain obligations with it. And then what had happened is that normally around Prince George, even before I was here and you were here, there were as many as 600 sawmills around the Prince George area. Yeah. And then the sawmills would get an allocation of timber, and they brought the mill to the timber, and then cut rough lumber, and then brought it into town to now River Road, where actually my mill is located, one of the few ones left there. But that's where all the planer mills were, and they called it then Planer Road. Right. And
interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So that's and so all the planer mills were there, and then the sawmills were there, and then close utilization came in, and saying that if you want to continue to harvest and cut timber, then you can no longer take the fall down or have the tree and waste it or burn it. It must then be directed to a pulp mill. Yeah. And obviously the pulp mills then got major incentives in terms of timber supply licenses, and so that's really what created the change in the early 60s. And then the evolution was from there on in. The mills in the bush could not afford to put in debarkers and chippers, and they sold out to others, and then that was the major change in the industry.
Well, you can still see remnants of the old mills in the forest, and you go skiing or hiking or something, and big sawdust piles, and
precisely,
it's amazing.
And that all goes back to then, right? So that was very interesting. That was a major change, you know. So
and I think the other major change, of course, was the university coming in, and the college as well. Really, I think changed the whole dynamic and everything of Prince George. It's been great having the university here.
Yeah, well, it changed the region really.
That's true,
you know, and it was such an effort and so many people involved, and it was a battle to get it here because they obviously 16,000 people signed up this $5. The other part was a number of people, Murray Sadler, Tom Stedman, and a number of people, Bruce Strachan, and on and on and on. Were very active in bringing the local politics on side in the communities, and then the riding presidents like myself were fighting the battle in Victoria and elsewhere to get that money allocated to it, and it was a battle. We had busloads of people going down to Penticton to an annual meeting of the Soviet government, and I still know we had all buttons and we had flags at UNBC, and but we did it we did get it done, and that became the freestanding university, and now being recognized as the best small university in Canada, and I think it's an amazing accomplishment.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, we have, I think, a lot to be proud of, not only at the Prince George campus, but our regional campuses as well. And yeah, it's been a tremendous addition to the north.
Yeah, and then and I had the honor of the receiving an honorary doctorates of laws, in May of 2019.
I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was quite an experience. So to have that, and so then talking a little bit more about you in particular and the forestry. I think the name was changed at some point. It's a degree granting part that you manage, and how is it called again? It deals with pathology, but also ecology and disease and.
Right. So the name of the degree is now a Bachelor of Science Forestry. But it comes from the program of Ecosystem Science and Management, which embodies a number of other degrees in addition to the forestry, wildlife and fisheries, and environmental studies, and a whole bunch of other resource-related outdoor recreation, tourism. So it's kind of we try to look at it more as a holistic approach, not just forest for the sake of forest, but what are the other values and those kinds of things, and looking at it more from a natural resources management. Okay. So including wildlife and habitat, water, and all those kinds of things when we make decisions around forests. So we tried to bring it a bit more holistically into the degree. So
if somebody's, how many people have you got in
forestry?
Yeah.
I'm not sure what the numbers are now. Usually we get, about 20 students a year coming in. It goes up and down, of course, as you would know, with the cycling that happens in the forest industry.
Right.
But it was definitely growing over the last several years. Lots of interest, I think, especially in the conservation area, but not only.
Yeah, and it's changing as well, right? So
the
forestry is not anything near what it used to be, and then obviously during the period. And that's why it is interesting to talk about it between yourself and myself. Myself, I've been quite involved in the manufacturing side of the industry and secondary manufacturing, and but also looking at it from the academic side in terms of the involvement of UNBC in particular in the College of New Caledonia. And with the changes in forestry, with different buildings, different structures, and one of the buildings is sitting close by here, the one sitting down there, actually cross-laminated timber, which is one of the first ones.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
And again, to a lot of people that may not know that that it was in the mid-90s that the Woodworks Initiative started in Prince George, and actually I was the founding chair of it, an initiative that was started by the federal government. And there was a pilot project in Quebec and then one in Prince George at CNC. And I was one of the ones that started with it, and then it expanded from there on in, and not only into BC and Canada, but even into the United States.
Oh yeah, no, it's been a big transition that's happened in the manufacturing for sure, and the Wood First Act, I believe, was brought in just a little bit after that as well. So looking at government buildings having to be made out of wood, I mean, that's perfect.
And the interesting part about it all, Kathy, was that at the time my daughter was studying architecture at UBC, and I was quite involved with UBC and looking at the Woodworks program. One of the problems was for industry, as we brought in people from far and wide to see our manufacturing facilities and to see the type of timber we manufactured as a whole, and why they should buy more of our wood for other places in the world. If somebody came off the plane, then the first thing that would come to mind, if you think it's so good, Why are you not using it? Because what was obvious, we were not using it. And so that changed the culture in terms of use of wood in structures. And one of the problems also was that, as simple as, and I'm sure you've seen these things happening in industry or around it, is that a lot of times connections were not taught in architecture. So one of the reasons that not much was done like that, because they simply didn't teach connections.
Oh, really?
And obviously that was changed as a result of woodworks as well.
Right.
And now a lot of times when we go around, we see more and more. The building here is one classic one. I believe there will be another major building built here at some point with CLT.
Yep. Well, a lot of UNBC is built with both glulam and paralam timbers. So
and all
absolutely.
of that, right?
Yeah.
So and it's a changing industry.
Yeah, for sure.
And then on the other part, and obviously since the industry has evolved, pellets, meaning fuel pellets, better utilization of the tree, and then obviously chips then became part of it, and associated paper and pulp that was attached to it. Myself, I brought to Canada finger jointing. That was really not done in Canada at all, but it was something I had been exposed to in Europe. And and the industry is evolving really as we speak.
Oh, definitely. I'm getting into even different kinds of products, like chemicals that you get from wood, and beyond just the wood products themselves, but getting into some of these other nanocrystalline cellulose and some of those other kinds of things. So it definitely is evolving, and it's good. The more we can get out of every single tree, the fewer trees we need to cut to keep the economy going and keep people employed. So that's a good thing.
Yeah, and that's a good thing. And then we have this amazing province of British Columbia that's a natural place to grow timber, right, in the interior, and then different down the coast, but in particular in the interior. And so even during the time that I was here, is that I remember, and you probably were here then as well, in the early 80s we had a spruce beetle attack in the Bowron region.
Yeah, oh yeah. One of my first, when I was working with the Ministry of Forests, one of the first field trips I had was my supervisor drove me around through the Bowron clear cut.
Right.
And it was an eye-opener. It was an amazing thing.
Yeah. And that really started in, probably it's also in part of your field of expertise, because what had happened, there was a blowdown of timber in the Bowron Park region, and they could not really harvest it because it was a park, and it came, the suggestion was, from there, and then it spread around.
I think it was quite a large blowdown event that happened outside the park as well.
Okay.
And so even if it hadn't been in the park, it would have gotten going. It takes a lot to get that population up, but that, from what I understand, that wind throw event was pretty substantial. And then they had some fire escapes too when they were trying to do some of the salvage, the broadcast burning in the old days after harvesting. They would do burning, and sometimes that would escape, and that just kind of created additional problems.
Right. And even during that period, I set up a sawmill in the middle of all of that operated there from 1983 until 1988. To deal with whatever the mills didn't want.
Right.
We produced then into lumber until it was pretty much gone. So the occurrence of beetles in that area was already then major, and I still remember people used to say they could see it from the sky or from the spacecraft.
I heard that too. I'm not sure I believe it, but yeah.
But a dwarfed in comparison, what would follow is in the pine beetle epidemic.
Yeah.
Now, that again started in the Burns Lake region and in the park there, Tweedsmuir Park?
Near Tweedsmuir, but there were small pockets all over the place. And again, if it hadn't started in the park, it started everywhere. And it was a combination of a number of things that was happening across especially the central interior of the province. Yeah, so, increasing numbers of old pine was part of it, and climate change was another big part. And it just all came together, and we had quite a big event.
You see, that's why I like you as an interesting guest for not only me but also for the listeners, is because at the pine beetle, the impact of the pine beetle, it pretty much destroyed most of the pine, lodgepole pine in the interior of the province, probably 75% of it.
Yeah.
And then as you indicate, but we are still doing really just talking as forest industry, we are still cutting virgin forest here.
In the interior, we are, not on the coast so much, but yeah.
But that in the interior we are.
Yeah.
And, and then obviously because of climate change and aging of the forest, it then is no different, am I making the right analogy here, no different than people, once it gets old, it becomes subject to disease, and then from there on in, we get situations like that.
Yeah, I think that's about right. I think one of the major factors, though, has been fire suppression. So we tend to suppress fires in order to preserve the resource. But the problem there is that these are fire-driven ecosystems, many of them. You take fire out of the system, the forest gets older, and then they get more susceptible to the beetles.
Yeah, so we become too good at suppressing natural fires.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so between that part, that natural fires do usually not occur, add to that an aging forest, and then add to that global warming, and we have reality.
Storm. Yeah, perfect storm for the beetles.
And then the other thing that we had is that we had another outbreak again, probably 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years ago again, maybe not quite, you know the dates better than I do likely, that came out of the Peace region, also in the spruce beetle.
Yeah.
And that still is active to a certain extent.
Yes, the spruce beetle outbreak is still going on. And we also have some issues with Douglas fir beetle as well in some of the Douglas fir ecosystems. And I think, again, a lot of that's tied to climate change and not getting the cold temperatures in the winter to kill off the larvae.
Yeah. And all of that. And we could already see it here, 20 years ago. Let me see, 20 years ago, yeah, probably 20 years ago, that any of the Douglas fir that we have here, not in the same proportions as we see it elsewhere, but we could already see that there was beetle in the Douglas fir. It was quite obvious, as you could see it turning gray and all of that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So that then being said, as from a forest industry perspective, and from an ecology or pathology perspective, how do we deal with that? Because now what has occurred is that the annual allowable cut, which is the amount of timber set that we can harvest to have sustainable yield curve, and for the public that may not be as familiar with it, is that once we determine the volume of timber and we then determine the ratio of growth to maturity, we can then calculate in some formula the amount of annual allowable cut to maintain a steady growth. If it takes 100 years to grow, we can take 1 tree a year or something along those formulas. Now, what used to be is about 60 million cubic meters annually was a fairly sure number in that area, and So then during the pine beetle epidemic, there were uplifts that brought it as high as 80. Then that went from 2000 to 2015, 16, 17, 18, and then obviously the economic value deteriorated, and then it had to be readjusted to the prior 60 million cubic meters annually, but then it had to go below that again to calculate and how much had been lost, and now likely it is closer to 35 to 40 million cubic meters. And then we call that, so then what happened then is that it affected communities and regions. So where in the province of British Columbia, we probably have close to 35 sawmills that had to shut down because of access to fiber, and probably at least 20 in the interior. And that's a process that is still on the way, and where there likely would be more shuts because it's still adjusting to a new reality.
Yeah, for sure. There's definitely was a fall down effect due to the pine beetle epidemic, but I think there's also a realignment around what is actually sustainable in terms of harvesting versus all of the other values that we want from the forest. And we've already talked a little bit about climate change, and forests have an incredible role to play there, and they have to be healthy and sustainable in order to fulfill that role. And they also provide habitat values and other things. And so as we learn more and more about what is important for the forests, I think that is causing and does need to cause an adjustment in how we're harvesting and what we're getting out of the forest, not just sticking with what we used to do, but getting some of these other new products that we're talking about.
And some of the values that you're talking about are in the news indirectly, but that's why it is so good to have you as a guest, talking about these things, because caribou is another one that is a delicate one and another value, and it may affect certain areas in terms of for harvesting, to balance all those values, which likely will add more downward pressure on the annual allowable cut. Then it makes me wonder from an industry perspective, but I'm very sensitive to, we are probably one of the largest secondary manufacturers in the Brink group. I've done that for my company. I started here 47 years ago. We don't cut a single tree. We employ 400 people, and all we do is add value to the lower grades lumber, and do innovative approaches to the industry. I believe the new evolution of, if we just go back to what we were talking about earlier, where in the 50s we had around here 600 sawmills, and where the mill would go to the timber, but the process was immensely wasteful. And then the next thing that happened is that in the mid-60s, policies was introduced that that said close utilization, that unless you debark, or no, you have to manufacture chips. Well, the only way you could do that is you had to debark and then put in a chipper. A lot of times that would cost probably 10 times more than the whole mill was worth. So people sold off their tenure, and then other operations came in, Canfor, Northwood, Noranda, and other ones built pulp mills, got concessions in terms of major tender license, and then there was a consolidation of primary manufacturing. Then from there on in, obviously, if I kind of stand back with you and looking at the industry, the next thing that happened in about, hypothetically speaking, in 1980s, we had pine beetle attacks, but already indications that went further than that, that you know about. But I, from a public perspective, that was more in the public. And then the concern already was, this is an aging forest. So add to that climate change and and then we become too effective and efficient at dealing with natural occurring fires that create a new forest. All of a sudden, now we are probably at the point where the reality has hit home. We got too much capacity, and there is a new industry, hopefully emerging. I'm an optimist. I believe that it's huge potential.
Oh, I do too, and I think we still have way too much dependence on dimension lumber and pulp in this province, and the more that we can do to expand the different kinds of products that we make, expand the markets that we sell them to, I think is part of the solution. It's not the only part, but that's definitely a part of it.
So government, I'm not political, I'm apolitical, but government, dealing with these issues of the day, and then obviously the other thing that has happened is that cost of harvesting, stumpage, and general cost of operating has become where at one point industry here, partially because of cheaper timber and beetles to a certain extent, was the lowest cost producers of dimension lumber in the marketplace on a global basis. That has changed, where now gradually has become the highest cost producers. Hence, we have seen the major companies that, as a consolidation of the industry, we probably have 4 companies in the interior controlling probably 80% of all the tenure. And most of those companies are not investing in BC, but are investing elsewhere, like the U.S. Southeast, Sweden, Germany to a certain extent, and outside of the province. So that then being said, then government took an initiative, on saying we must do something about that, because the people demanded that something happens. Like McKinsey are good indications that they had a number of sawmills, but most of those are not operating anymore. And and at one point there was at least the notion of prudency that meant that harvested timber should be manufactured at the location, or the social contract, if you wish. And all of that is changing now, and government introduced at least the thought of a program, say the intentions paper, in which modernizing of the industry. And I had the opportunity to, I didn't realize that, but I was there was somebody from First Nations that made comments to that announcement, somebody from labor, and then somebody from industry. It was me actually from industry that made, it just happened that way because I was contacted and asked to make. So my views were on it that the way I see the industry is that we have innovative primary in combination with intensive secondary, will be the new industry, not making the same dimension lumber or spaghetti over and over again, but extracting other values, and then at the same time, stimulating further manufacturing, like what we are doing. Is we employ lots more labor and per 1,000 cubic meters or per cubic meter, so there are opportunities there.
Oh, definitely. I think another part of the equation, though, is we have to change what we're doing in the forest itself, and not be managing only for the dimension lumber and the pulp that we've always managed for, but bringing in diversity elements like hardwoods. But we can't just have the hardwoods growing and no place to do something with them in the end. And so I think there's a lot of product development that needs to come from a diversification of the forest itself, which will help with sustainability over time. So I'm a big advocate of bringing back natural ecosystems and including hardwoods. But then we also need to think about, okay, so if we start growing these hardwoods, how do we maybe use them down the road? They're valuable in and of themselves for habitat and for that kind of thing, but I think there's also some huge opportunities in looking at other kinds of things that we can make using a completely different suite of tree species. The ones that are native to the ecosystems that we've been eliminating because they don't fit our current model of the dimension lumber using the 4 main species. So I think there's some opportunities there as well that need further work.
Yeah, and I agree with you, and that's why I'm glad to have the discussion. And so what I did is just kind of for both of our benefit is that, but I do a lot of times, I compare, I was fortunate enough to work in the industry in Holland, and I grew up in the lumber industry and spent time in Sweden, but mainly in Holland. And then when I was 24, I came here in 1965, and then the first thing that I just couldn't believe it, how much wood would go up the burner for one. And then, but I do a lot of times, I make the comparisons between, us of how much fiber we grow per hectare, and saying that, that we have to invest more in the land base in terms of, the managing the forest, because to me, and that's, I'm not an expert other than from experience, saying that if we can grow more forest per hectare, we can change the curve in terms of the yield. Rather than taking 70, 80 years to grow, once managed better and more properly, we can likely reduce that to 40 to 50 years to grow.
Yes, there's all kinds of problems with that, though, in BC because of the way that our tenure system works and who is going to make that investment in intensive forestry. But for sure, I think there's been lots of jurisdictions, the US is one of them, Sweden's another, where they've demonstrated that intensive management will yield more volume per hectare.
And it only makes sense.
Well, it doesn't. I agree with you if you're making a particular product, but in order to get that intensive growth, sometimes you sacrifice diversity, whether it's species diversity or age class diversity, and that can then open us up to a risk of catastrophic consequences like fires and beetles. So I think there's a balance somewhere in there. Maybe some areas intensive, but other areas, maybe more natural ecosystem.
So what it shows to me, Kathy, is that, the things that you are doing and that UBC is doing and that others are doing around the world, that in particular here in northern BC, we have the opportunity to evolve from where we are now as to what should it look like as we go forward. And I know there is a distinct difference between the forest in Sweden is mainly owned by privately, not government, and the same applies to Sweden. And in other places, ours is somewhat unique, but it is no different in terms of that the stakeholders must have an interest in making sure that the forest is healthy, that it addresses the issue of good utilization, and that it is in balance, and that we have to invest more into the forest to make sure that that it is managed well and properly.
Yep, I totally agree. I think there's opportunities for looking at different kinds of silviculture systems than we've currently been using that allow us to retain some of the elements that enable forests to be more resilient. So enabling that diversity, just as an example. I think partial cut harvesting, there's some real opportunities there. Even in the interior where we have fire-driven ecosystems, fires don't tend to create square blocks on the landscape. They create different kinds of impacts on the land, and I think if we can get our harvesting systems to mimic those a little bit better, then that's one step in the right direction.
Yeah. So the way I have always looked at it is that I've been in the industry now for 65 years. If the math works like this. I started working when I was 15. I'm 81. So that makes 65 years, always in the forest industry. So one of the things that I always believed in is that, and that's why I was very involved with CNC, is, the Trade and Technology Center.
Yep.
That I believe that's we must do more of that, and you know, so and work closely with Dr. Dennis Johnson, you know, and then I've also worked with them on a Center of Excellence, and made a commitment to that financially, and we have been working on that for the last 4 or 5 years, and I've talked to Dr. Jeff Payne about that, as well as Dr. Dennis Johnson, and saying that the Center of Excellence to me means that precisely what we are talking about is that that not only addresses the issue of developing skill sets that we need for a new industry, developing new products for new markets, but also dealing with you know, our land base and our forestry, intensive forestry. How do we deal with it? And visualizing, hypothetically speaking, a lot of it will be technology, the equipment that we use to manufacture new products for new market, including the ones that gets me excited just hearing you talking about it, from the biology, but the amount, the amazing resource that we have, and the amazing base that we have, forest base that we have, and all the potential in terms of products that flow from that, and help the carbon footprint and all the things. It is an immense opportunity, and you know, kind of looking forward in terms of developing thoughts around robotics and technology, and creating all new products for all new markets. All of that is possible, and I see us now entering into a period of where we say we have to go further than we have gone so far. Both CNC and the UNBC, great, in combination with Forentech and UBC and BCIT, we must have a Center of Excellence of the North, and which would be a project between CNC and UNBC that deals with precisely the issues that you raise and the ones that I raise, in terms of the time now has come for where we are entering in now to the midterm of low volumes, lower volumes, and where industry and government is primed, in my opinion, and especially considering First Nations will play a much larger role, which is good, both in managing the forest, but also in manufacturing. I believe the time has come for a Center of Excellence that deals with things, as I look forward to products that you are talking about, that are not even being considered, maybe considered, but are possible in the interior of the province. And they go far beyond what we have seen so far, and far beyond dimension lumber and CLT, DLT, finger jointing, but go far beyond that. You know, where we are managing, you know, we have robotics managing, working 24/7 in the bush, managing the forest, where we know exactly where each tree is growing for all intents and purposes, keeping a record of the health of the forest, all of that.
Well, we're able to do some of that already through a lot of remote sensing technologies, and it's amazing what things like LiDAR are able to do, you know, in terms of helping us understand volume changes over time and species compositions and forest health. So absolutely, I think a Center of Excellence that would help us merge the technology you're talking about in terms of the wood manufacturing end of things with some of the technologies we already have on the forest land base, and then put that together with expanding our understanding of how we can manage the forest ecosystem itself better, so that it can be resilient, but it can also still produce some of these economic benefits that we're looking for. And that is something, if we could bring all those three elements together, I think it would be amazing.
Yeah, we must do that. I believe now it's at the point, and as we started our discussion, talking about you know, close utilization where and that's why for our discussion, because we're both so familiar with it, is that we had 600 sawmills in the bush and, blah, 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 and all of those kind of things, which were amazing, there's no question about that. And then how it all evolved, virtually all in a lifetime, for myself, I've been part of industry for 65 years, nearly 60 years here. And when I came in 60s, it was just consolidating then, and the pulp mills were still being built and finished. But now we have reached the point where, from government's perspective, the way we're managing the forest and the way we are utilizing all the resources that we have in terms of academic and the actual location, the resources that we have available, the province of British Columbia, there is no place in the world that is more, beautiful, obviously, but also in terms of rewarding from where to grow a forest. There's nothing more suitable than we have here.
Yeah.
And it is waiting for the next phase. And I believe the next phase is precisely where you're going with what you're doing. And that I kind of feel now we are back to the early 80s, and that we said we must develop a freestanding university in northern British Columbia, and that we need to develop a center of excellence here that will deal with that, not only the forest but other technologies that we have to develop to really bring a whole change to northern British Columbia.
Yeah, absolutely. No argument from me. Yeah, the more we can do to enable us to get the values that we want from the forest and not cut as much as we have been in the past, the better. And so I think that really does bring together that technology for the manufacturing side and our understanding of how to manage forest ecosystems, and then bring in the business element of what new products can we make and where can we sell them, how many people can we employ, and bring all that together. That would be brilliant.
Yeah, and we can already see what can happen if I look at UNBC, in our boardroom. I think it was a month or two ago, and we had a meeting, with a number of people, 6 or 8 people sitting around the table. Every single one of them was an alumni,
right,
including me, of UNBC.
Yeah.
That is what will happen.
Yeah.
And that's precisely the way I feel about it, and that's why I started 4 or 5 years ago already with the CNC to talking about the Center of Excellence and making a commitment of $1 million towards that, making that happen. And I've talked about it wherever the opportunity presents itself, but now more than ever, that opportunity is there. And I had an opportunity to talk to Dr. Jeff Payne about it as well, and I believe that they are talking more, and there is more coming, more awareness becoming, and the same in the politicians, I believe, are ready for it as well.
I think so. I think they're definitely a little more open to collaborating with universities and maybe more open to a change in how things have been going, and we have to make that change.
Yeah, and bringing those, it reminds me again of the University of Northern British Columbia, where we brought communities together, individuals together, this 16,000, and then, coordinated approach to, saying this is what it must be, this is what it should look like, and then forcing forward. And I believe that's possible now.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts that you have about,
No, I don't think so. Done a pretty good job of covering it.
Yeah. We've covered a lot of it.
We have.
So I really enjoyed my time with you, Kathy, and again, I loved the opportunity to have dialogue with you, and I learned a lot from talking to you, and it gives you more encouragement in terms of going the next step and aggressively again pursuing this. We should stay in touch. And,
Absolutely. Yeah.
And go from there.
Right. Great. Thank you very much.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you.